Darth Glovoc is the longest surviving Sith Lord in Star Wars Legends, and somewhere out there, sealed inside an ancient stasis casket on a storm-covered planet in the Mid-Rim, he may still be breathing. No one knows if he will ever wake, no one knows what he would do if he did, and no one, not the Jedi, not the Sith, not the galaxy that has moved on without him for 4,000 years, even knows where to look. He served Revan's empire, chased a force vision to a world called Nyriaan, crashed there, and made a choice that placed him outside of time itself, sleeping through Darth Bane, the Clone Wars, Darth Vader, and the fall of the Empire, while the rest of the Sith rose and died were replaced over and over. This is his complete story, drawn entirely from the Legends continuity, and to tell it properly, we've combed through every available source that touches his name. Chapter 1. Lord of the Mind's Eye. Darth Glovoc was one of the most feared commanders in Revan's Sith Empire, a military mind the Order valued, a Sith the Order kept at arm's length, and a man whose victories on the battlefield were matched only by the reputation for instability that followed him everywhere. He was responsible for several highly successful campaigns against the Galactic Republic during the Jedi Civil War. He was valued and feared. In an order built on strength and ruthlessness, that meant something. But Glovoc was not like the other Sith commanders, where most of his peers spent their off hours sharpening blades or consolidating power. Glovoc disappeared into meditation. He was brilliant, but also believed to be somewhat insane, a reputation he did nothing to discourage. He spent the majority of his free time in deep meditative states, not the careful, controlled meditation of a Jedi trying to quiet the mind, but a plunging, searching kind of focus that pushed outward through the Force, seeking something he couldn't quite name. He called this practice his true work. He called himself, with complete seriousness, the Lord of the Mind's Eye. Other Sith thought he was unhinged. They tolerated him because of his results on the battlefield, but they kept their distance. A commander who spent more time in trance than in briefings made people uncomfortable, and in an empire built on domination and calculated cruelty, discomfort was enough to mark someone as a liability. Yet Glovoc didn't care. He had a short temper and absolute faith in his visions, a combination that made him dangerous to argue with. He was known to execute subordinates who contradicted his interpretation of what the Force was showing him, and when pushed far enough, he could subject a person to a slow and agonizing death. He was not a Sith Lord who inspired loyalty through charisma. He inspired it through fear, and through the undeniable fact that his campaigns worked. What he was actually searching for in all those hours of meditation was the key to the Sith's ultimate victory over the Republic and the Jedi. That was the goal he had given himself, not just battlefield success, but some deeper answer, some insight the dark side might deliver if he was patient enough and willing to push far enough into the void between thoughts. He believed the Force was trying to show him something, and that if he listened long enough, it would. For years, it didn't. He kept fighting, kept winning, kept meditating while the war ground on. Then, near the closing years of the Jedi Civil War, under Darth Malik's rule, Darth Glovoc finally got his answer. It came in a dream, and when he woke from it, everything he had spent years fighting for suddenly meant nothing compared to what it was showing him. Chapter 2. The Vision. Inside his mind, in the deep place he had spent years trying to reach, Glovoc saw a world. It was dark, not the comfortable darkness of deep space, but a churning, living darkness. The planet was wrapped entirely in thick, layered cloud, the kind that made the surface invisible from orbit. Through those clouds, violet lightning tore in long, jagged bolts, like dark energy made visible. The whole world pulsed with a strange electricity. He couldn't see what was on the surface. He couldn't see what was down there, but something in the vision reached him in a way years of meditation had not. The Force was not whispering this time. It was pointing. Glovoc woke up absolutely certain that that's what he had been looking for, and that he had to find it immediately. What exactly he believed the planet held is not spelled out in the source material. The vision filled him with an overwhelming desire to investigate. He was sure the dark side was telling him something significant was there, and he didn't feel the need to explain himself further to anyone who questioned him. When a subordinate apparently pushed back on his interpretation of the dream, Glovoc's response was the kind that ended conversations. He began searching his records for any system that matched what he had seen. He was looking for a world with permanent cloud cover in a region the Sith hadn't thoroughly explored, a world that had been passed over or ignored because there was no obvious strategic value in cataloging it. After combing through navigation data, he found what he was looking for, the Lure system. Tucked away in the mid-rim, home to a fifth planet that matched his vision almost exactly. Glovoc received his vision during the final months of the Jedi Civil War, at the precise moment when the conflict was approaching its breaking point. Darth Malak was fighting to hold the Sith Empire together. The redeemed Revan, his memories restored, his identity rebuilt by the Jedi, was moving against the Starforge, the ancient Rakatan superweapon that powered the Sith war machine. Everything was in motion. The outcome of the war was no longer certain, and in that moment, Glovoc made a decision that shocked even the people who already thought he was losing his mind. He abandoned the war entirely. He took command of an interdictor-class warship called the Dying Sun and ordered his crew to set course for the Lure system. He left no explanation that the sources record. He simply went. The remaining Sith Empire, which had bigger problems to deal with than tracking down one eccentric commander, took a mild interest in his destination and then moved on. The Sith as a whole registered Glovoc's vision and the Lure system with passing curiosity, nothing more. As the Dying Sun moved through hyperspace toward Nyriaan, Glovoc slept again. He spent the journey with his mind's eye extended outward, trying to reach the world ahead of him, trying to pierce the cloud cover in his thoughts before his ship arrived in person. He couldn't. Something about the planet resisted his attempts to probe it from a distance. Whatever was down there was not giving itself up easily. That should have been a warning. Chapter 3. The Dying Sun Falls. The Dying Sun arrived at Nyriaan in 3956 BBY. From orbit, the planet looked exactly like Glovoc's dream. Thick, churning clouds covered every surface of the world below, and purple lightning cracked through the layers in long, brilliant flashes. The crew ran active scans. They needed to understand what they were looking at before anyone descended. That decision cost them. The active sensors were powerful enough to do their job, and powerful enough to be detected. Glovoc was so focused on Nyriaan, so deep in his attempt to read the planet, that he didn't sense the Republic vessels approaching until it was already too late. He had come all this way chasing a vision, and in the moment of arrival, his obsession with the planet below became the thing that blinded him to the threat beside him. A Republic strike force had stumbled into the Lure system, and when they found a Sith interdictor-class warship sitting in orbit over an uncharted planet, they didn't ask questions. The battle that followed was brief and violent. The Dying Sun's crew was Sith-trained, and they fought hard. They managed to destroy 3 Republic cruisers and a significant number of Republic starfighters before the tide turned. But 3 cruisers were not enough. The Republic forces kept pressing, and the Dying Sun was taking hits it couldn't absorb. Torpedoes struck critical systems. The warship that had carried Glovoc across the galaxy in search of his vision began to come apart. Caught in Nyriaan's gravity well, the Dying Sun couldn't escape. Its orbit decayed. It broke into pieces as it fell, sections of the hull separating as the atmosphere tore at the damaged frame, and what remained hit the surface in a crash that any surviving crew member was lucky to walk away from. Escape pods from both sides rained down alongside the debris. None of them was ever heard from again. The Republic forces, having dealt what they calculated as a killing blow to an enemy warship in a remote system, recorded the engagement and moved on. They never stopped to ask why a Sith commander had been orbiting an unremarkable mid-rim planet in the first place. The Republic simply assumed the Dying Sun had been hiding, avoiding discovery in a quiet corner of space. They didn't know what they had stumbled into, and they never went back to find out. On the surface of Nyriaan, among the scattered wreckage and the survivors who had made it through the crash, Darth Glovoc was still alive. His survival was nothing short of miraculous. The crash of the Dying Sun should not have left many people standing, but Glovoc was standing, and a handful of his crew were with him, and the planet that had called to him from the other side of a dream was now all around them. It was everything the vision had shown. The cloud cover so thick that nothing in the sky was visible, the lightning cracking constantly through layers of storm, the air heavy and electric in a way that made the Force behave strangely. When Glovoc attempted to reach outward through the Force to sense the planet the way he had tried to from orbit, he found the same wall he had encountered on the voyage over. His mental probes couldn't breach the cloud layer. Whatever the interference was, whether it came from the atmosphere itself, from something in the ionosphere, from the magnetic field that drove the endless storms, it cut off Force perception in both directions. A Force user on the surface could not sense space, and a Force user in space could not sense anything below. The dark side had led him here, and here, the dark side couldn't fully reach him. Chapter 4. Stranded. What Glovoc did next defined what kind of leader he actually was beneath the meditation and the visions. He organized the survivors, however many of his crew had made it through the crash, and the escape pods, pulling them together under his authority. He turned them toward the problem of staying alive on a planet none of them had ever intended to land on. He was described during this period as a harsh but effective leader. The same qualities that had made him successful on the battlefield now directed towards survival instead of conquest. Nyriaan was not a welcoming world. The tempests were constant, with storms of varying intensity cycling across the surface throughout the year. The lightning made open ground dangerous. The cloud cover blocked any reliable view of the stars, which meant the disorientation of an unfamiliar world was compounded by the inability to navigate by the sky. They had the wreckage of the dying sun, whatever equipment had survived, and each other. They also had the dark side, and on the surface, at least, the Force still worked. It just couldn't reach beyond the atmosphere. Over time, Glovoc's people encountered the native inhabitants of Nyriaan. These interactions were hostile. The Sith survivors preyed on the natives when they could, and the wider population of Nyriaan learned quickly to avoid the area where Glovoc's group had settled. It was a harsh equilibrium. The Sith were too dangerous to approach, too small a group to threaten the planet as a whole, and too stranded to go anywhere. As time passed, Glovoc continued his meditation. The planet's force-dampening qualities never stopped bothering him. His disciples began to speculate about the source of the interference, and that speculation hardened over the years into something close to belief, a conviction that something within Nyriaan itself was causing the phenomenon. Not the weather, not the physics, but something that lived inside the world, something that had been there long before they arrived. Glovoc never confirmed it. He just kept meditating, kept pushing his perception towards the barrier, and kept failing. It was somewhere in these years, stranded on a planet that resisted his greatest ability, that Darth Glovoc made the decision that would make him the longest surviving Sith in recorded history. He wasn't gonna die on Nyriaan. Not of age, not of attrition, not of the slow, grinding defeat of watching his people dwindle while the galaxy moved on without him. If the Force had brought him here for a reason, he intended to be alive when that reason became clear. He had an oubliette. An oubliette was a Sith stasis casket, an artifact of considerable power and rarity. The only other oubliette documented in the Legends continuity was created by the ancient Sith Lord Remulus Drapa to imprison his rival Carnes Mir, as documented in the Legends Vector crossover comic arc, containing both the Sith Lord and the dangerous influence of the Mir talisman. These devices were not ordinary tools. They required significant knowledge to construct and even more to use safely. The fact that Glovoc possessed one aboard the Dying Sun says something about how seriously the Sith took his abilities, and how prepared he had been for possibilities he couldn't have fully anticipated. Inside the oubliette, a person could be kept alive for thousands of years, not frozen in the conventional sense, not carbonite, not cryostasis, but suspended in a deep, dark side sleep that slowed the body's processes to something close to nothing. It was sleep taken to its ultimate limit. It was the closest thing a mortal being could achieve to stepping outside of time. So he climbed in, and the galaxy moved on without him. Chapter 5. The Sleeping God. At first, he set limits for himself. Glovoc initially restricted his time in stasis to periods of roughly 100 years, long enough to sleep through the slow grind of history, short enough to check on the world he left behind. He would emerge, assess the situation, how many of his people were left, what condition they were in, whether any opportunity for escape from Nyriaan had presented itself, and then return to the casket and sleep again. One look at the world before going dark once more. What he found each time he emerged is not detailed in the source material. But the pattern of what happened to his followers is, these Sith survivors marooned across generations on a storm-covered planet with no way off, and a culture built around a leader who disappeared for a century at a time began to change. The process was stark. Over the millennia, they became twisted and inbred, their physical forms warping alongside their minds, their understanding of Sith discipline eroding into something more primal. They stopped being Sith warriors. They became something else entirely. The Children of the Tempest. It was the name of people who had been shaped by the storms, who had grown up under an unbroken ceiling of cloud, who had never once in their lives seen a clear sky. They hunted with spears. They howled like animals when they fought, a geologically active area where the ground itself breathed heat, and they performed rituals there that bore only a passing resemblance to anything that could be traced back to Sith doctrine. At the center of it all was the oubliette, the casket where their lord slept. The children called him the Dying Sun, taking the name from the wreckage of the ship that had brought them to this world. They built their reverence around his sleeping form. To them, he was not simply a commander or Dark Lord, he was a god. A deity who had chosen to rest until the right moment, who would one day open his eyes and lead them out of Nyriaan and into whatever greatness awaited beyond the storms. They sacrificed to him. They protected him with absolute ferocity. Any threat to the oubliette was a threat to the divine, and they responded accordingly. Glovoc, meanwhile, was sleeping more and more. His periods of consciousness grew increasingly infrequent as the centuries passed. Whether this was by design, or simply the casket doing its work, pulling him deeper the longer he stayed, is not recorded. What is clear is that, at some point, he stopped emerging at all. The 100-year intervals gave way to longer silences, and then to no intervals at all. He was in perpetual stasis. The world moved on without him. Centuries became millennia. The Jedi Civil War that had defined his entire career dissolving into ancient history, while the Republic that had shot him down over Nyriaan was replaced, reformed, shattered, and rebuilt again and again around him. Darth Bane rose and established the rule of two. Hundreds of Sith came and went under that rule, each one part of a dynasty that Glovoc had no knowledge of. The Sith disappeared from public view for 1,000 years. Then came Darth Sidious, the Clone Wars, the rise of the Empire, the destruction of the Death Star, Vader's fall, and Palpatine's death at Endor, and finally the birth of the New Republic. All of it unfolding while Glovoc breathed his slow, impossible breaths inside his casket on a planet nobody was looking for. The only disruption in his perfect unconsciousness came after Nyriaan was eventually colonized. As the planet began to develop, as more people arrived and settlements grew and the world became less isolated, the disturbance reached Glovoc even in stasis. His sleep became fitful, restless, as if something in the increasing presence of life and activity on the surface was penetrating the deep stillness the casket maintained. His followers tried everything they knew to wake him, pressing their hands to the casket, performing their rituals with greater intensity, calling to him in whatever language the Children of the Tempest had developed over the generations. But nothing worked. He wouldn't stir. Darth Glovoc was past the point where waking up was simple. He had gone too deep. Time had accumulated around him like weight, and pulling him back was not something his deformed descendants could manage on their own. Chapter 6. The One Sith Comes Calling. In 132 ABY, nearly 4,000 years after Darth Glovoc had first sealed himself into the casket, someone finally came looking for him. The galaxy at this point was under Darth Krayt's One Sith, and Krayt was hungry for anything that might strengthen his grip. Artifacts, knowledge, history. Rumors had reached his agents. Whispers about a Sith warship called the Dying Sun, which had vanished during the Jedi Civil War and never been accounted for, and what it might have been carrying when it disappeared. Krayt dispatched one of his Sith lords to investigate. His name was Darth Vader, and he traveled to Nyriaan to find whatever the Dying Sun had left behind. What Vader found when he arrived was not what he expected. He located the Sith settlement without too much difficulty. After 4,000 years, the Children of the Tempest had developed enough of a presence on Nyriaan that finding them was possible for someone who knew what to look for. But finding them and getting past them were different problems entirely. The deformed descendants of Glovoc's crew did not receive Vurik as a fellow Sith. They received him as a threat to their god. They attacked immediately, and Vurik cut through many of them. The One Sith Lord was powerful, and the Children of the Tempest, however devoted, were not trained warriors. But there were enough of them, and their protectiveness of the casket was absolute. Every step Vurik took towards Glovoc's sleeping form was contested. Then the situation complicated itself further. Other people on Nyriaan had noticed what was happening, local clan members, and among them a group of fugitive Jedi who had been living on the planet in hiding recognized that a One Sith Lord was attacking a settlement. They moved to intervene. Several of these Jedi confronted Vurik directly. The fight that followed went badly for both sides. Vurik wounded several of the Jedi and killed at least one, but he couldn't hold off both the Children of the Tempest and the Jedi simultaneously, and eventually he was forced to retreat to Locus, Nyriaan's capital city. While Vurik was occupied with the Jedi, the Children of the Tempest did exactly what they had been born to do. They protected their god, moving with a speed and coordination that surprised people who had only seen them as deformed and primitive. They relocated Glovoc's casket. By the time Vurik had extracted himself from the confrontation and turned back toward the settlement, it was gone, hidden somewhere in Nyriaan's vast, storm-covered terrain, in a location the children would die before revealing. Vurik was left with nothing. No Glovoc, no holocrons, no artifacts from Revan's era. He had come all this way and had only bodies and failure to show for it, and he couldn't bring himself to report that failure to Darth Krayt. Instead, he stayed on Nyriaan. He hired bounty hunters to track down the Jedi who had interfered with his mission, hoping to eliminate the witnesses to his defeat before anyone could report back, and he continued his search for the casket, quietly hoping that persistence would eventually turn up what force had not. Whether he ever found it is not recorded. Whether Glovoc is still out there, still breathing in the dark beneath Nyriaan storms, is not confirmed one way or the other. He outlasted everyone. That is the simplest way to say it, and also the cruelest. Every Sith Lord who rose after him, Darth Bane, Darth Sidious, Darth Vader, Darth Krayt, shaped the galaxy in ways that Glovoc never could. Wars were won and lost in his name's absence. Dynasties built themselves from nothing, burned the stars, and collapsed into dust. And through all of it, the Lord of the Mind's Eye lay sealed in his casket on a forgotten planet, breathing, technically alive, and completely irrelevant. He had gone into stasis to wait for the moment the Force was showing him. He had waited 4,000 years. The galaxy never came back for him. The dark side that had pulled him to Nyriaan never offered a second answer. The vision that had seemed so certain, so urgent, so obviously the thing his entire career had been building toward, it led him to a planet with no way off, and then left him there. He's the longest surviving Sith in recorded history. He survived everything, and history forgot him anyway. If Glovoc's story stayed with you, there is more on the channel worth your time. One of our longer videos breaks down why Imperial officers genuinely hated Darth Vader. Not feared him, hated him. And it goes to places you might not expect. And if you want to stay in that dark side headspace, we also have a full breakdown of every dark side moment in Anakin Skywalker's story, explained in full. Be sure to watch them next.